Hey guys, and welcome to Money Talks News, the podcast. In this episode, we're talking about growing generational wealth. In other words, leaving money to your heirs. According to the Census Bureau, baby boomers are nearly 9 times wealthier than their kids, the millennials. Which means, as baby boomers like me start dying, there's going to be one of the biggest wealth transfers in history. You want to create the kind of wealth you can pass down to the next generation, and maybe the one after that? Then you're in the right place. Because today we're all about legacy building. I'm Stacey Johnson as usual. My co-host will be financial journalist Miranda Marquardt. Hello, Miranda.
Hey, Stacey, I'm excited about this because I've already told my son I'm spending it all till it's gone and he's on his own. So let's do this.
That's my plan also. Listening in and sometimes contributing is producer and novice investor Aaron Freeman. Hello, Aaron.
Hey, it's great to be back.
And this week we're also welcoming friend of the show, Kevin Matthews, a former investment advisor and author of Starting Point, How to Create Wealth That Lasts. Hello, Kevin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Before we start, folks, remember this. This is not financial advice, so make sure to do your own research and consult your own experts before acting on anything you may hear on this podcast. Okay, let's dive in. Kevin, what got you interested in the topic of first of all, what is generational wealth? What are we talking about here?
What is generational wealth to me?
Yeah.
I would say it's passing on money and it's passing on knowledge. I think that's the general definition, but more importantly, it's giving my kids and my grandkids one day more choices and more options. Because for me, that's what money buys, right? It buys choices. Do I take a Greyhound bus or do I fly first class? The difference between that is how much money I have. So just making sure that I am making the right moves financially and making the right decisions so that my kids and my kids' kids can have more options.
Now, I'm going to tell you something right at the top of this podcast that I wanted to get your feedback on. I don't have kids. Mm-hmm. I have a wife that's younger than me, but I don't have kids. So what do I care? Do I care? Should I care?
Well, that depends. It's a great question, but it depends. If some people want to look at it more as legacy, and sometimes they'll set up a scholarship fund, or they'll donate to a specific charity to make sure that people left behind or that next generation is going to have better choices, better resources, and perhaps opportunities that you didn't have.
That makes sense. So what I'm hearing you say then is even though I don't have kids, I could still want to leave a legacy for like the Humane Society, which is one of my favorite charities. Something like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main thing is, it's your own definition, right? So that was mine, and then yours may be the Humane Society, but the main thing is leaving something behind so that the people who are coming behind you are going to have a better experience for the most part.
Well, just to be clear, I want to go back and reiterate what was just said at the beginning of this podcast, which is I plan on spending it all if I can. So
Nothing wrong with that, actually.
I'm planning on having no legacy. I said that to my parents. They're both passed now, but I said to them back in the day, you should spend all your money. Because you know what happens? You spend your life saving and saving and scrimping. And my parents both were children of the Depression. And so they died with considerable money. And I was like, enjoy yourself. Buy a Mercedes. Do something, Mm-hmm. And they would do that. As a result, I got a legacy, which I appreciated, of course. But so it's my point was, it's easy to say I'm going to spend it all, but most of us are not going to do that. I mean, most of us who at least were able to put something aside.
Mm-hmm.
And now with all the heat waves and water shortages, the world's coming to an end. So should we do a legacy anymore? Or just
what's the point? We're all going to be dead by the end of the day. That reminds me of a Henny Youngman expression. I've got all the money I'll ever need as long as I'm dead by 4 o'clock. Okay, so now let's get serious, though. This seems like a weird topic to me, Kevin, and I'll tell you why. Because it's like leaving a legacy means accumulating a bunch of money. I mean, really, isn't that what we're discussing here? And if so, well, of course, everybody wants to have a bunch of money. I mean, how do we aim at leaving a legacy? I guess is what I'm trying to ask you.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's really a combination. So yes, it's about accumulating some assets, some level of assets, and it's also about passing on behavior and knowledge as well. Because my thing, and I've told my kids, they're only 2 and 5, but I was like, hey, if you waste what I give you, I'm going to haunt you for the rest of your life. So the main thing is saying, hey, this is what I've started for you. It doesn't have to be millions. It doesn't have to be like 100,000, but starting them off with something and saying, here's what I've done. Here's what I've learned so that you can avoid these mistakes. Perhaps it's written down. Perhaps it's just, taught as they're raised. But it's about having the two of those things together. We have this, when we say generational wealth, I think the automatic number is like $1 million or more. And that's not always the case. There are a lot of times where it's just, hey, I started off with 0 and now you're starting off with more than that, right? And it's always about the building block, and it's going to take time. But it's also saying, hey, look, here are the barriers and things that I have navigated through. Here's what you need to know. Like I've seen some cases where there have been family businesses that have passed down year after year. It's not necessarily cash, but the knowledge and the wealth of saying, look, we know this market, right? We know this business, and you're growing up into it, and it's an easy pass down, right? And that's a part of the generational portion of it as well. So it looks different depending on who you are and what you're into, and then what you know and what you have to pass down in the first place.
Yes. And you know, I've read this, and I'm sure you have too, Kevin, but one of the big disparity of wealth between whites and blacks in this country is the lack of generational wealth. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really key thing to do too, because I mean, if you start off, I mean, look, I inherited a couple $100,000 from my parents. If you start off with that, that can change everything in your whole life. Mm-hmm. So it's really important. And unfortunately, because of systemic racism in our country, the ability of people of color to be able to do that has been limited. And I think that's something we're hopefully changing.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things that factor into that, right? It's about what laws were passed, right? Who was allowed to own property in what areas, and whether or not that was, passed down, and where the next person started from. And it does have a huge impact, because like you said, even $1,000 head start for 20 years is going to be completely different, right? For someone who started out with nothing. So that does have an impact on where you end up or where you can end up. But in either case, the main thing is to start, if that is an aspiration of yours, because it is going to has to start somewhere, right? That first brick, that first step has to start with someone. And if you started from behind or had some challenges, start it today so that the next generation isn't going to run into the exact same thing.
Cool. So help us do that. Lay the foundation. What's the first brick? What should we do?
Yeah. So the first thing is to sit down and define what that generational wealth is going to be. Because again, that definition can be very liquid depending on what it is you're looking for and what your family structure could be as well. So that's the first thing. The next thing is to obviously save more than you spend, and that whole thing, which we've talked about before. But the main thing is setting up your success, having those beneficiaries named, and having a plan for where these assets are going to go and what you want them to be at the end. And I think that's the structural things that you have to have.
Now, I'm a little confused. Give me what brick one was, making a plan, right? Or defining what a legacy is. Is that what it was? I don't want to put words in your mouth. I forget.
Yes, that's right.
Give me an example of that.
Yeah. So for me, for my two kids, I want to make sure that should they go to college, they don't have any student debt. So that's number one. And then number two, I want to make sure that they have at least $50,000 to buy their first home. So that is my plan. Okay, so I'm using that and working backwards. How much do I need to save per month? This means I now need to open a 529 plan for them because should they go to college, I want to make sure that they have that. So that is because I set out what that plan is. I now can work backwards and adjust my budget for what I need to do today.
This makes total sense. But I'm wondering if somebody listening to this podcast wouldn't be thinking, well, geez, you're already making me save for retirement. I've got to save for this, that, the other. I mean, do I really have to start saving for legacy too? I mean, how many things am I supposed to be saving for here?
Yeah, so you don't have to, and that's the thing. So because my vision is to have those two things for my kids, I would assume, right, if I'm just kind of going off of when I bought my house and all that kind of stuff, they would need the money, I don't know, somewhere around age 30, right? Mm-hmm. So I need to start saving today. However, what if my goal is to, once I pass, leave them X amount? Well, in that case, I can just primarily save for me, right? And perhaps get a life insurance policy, or just have them as a beneficiary and they get whatever's left over. So that's why it's so important to figure out what that plan is, because that's going to inform whether or not you need to change your budget now, or whether or not you can prioritize yourself and have them have whatever is left over.
I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I was just going to say one way you can leave a legacy is a life insurance policy.
Absolutely.
And I'm not a fan of life insurance, by the way. I've never had any, and now I'm self-insured because I'm old and rich. But is that something you would advise people to do? Because if so, we have to start talking about what kind of insurance people should get.
Yeah, so that's why it's very dependent upon where you are and what your goal is. So if you are someone that says, at the end of this entire thing, at the end of my life, I want to make sure I spend everything, I want to make sure I enjoy it, which is amazing, then yes, you may want to have a life insurance policy at the end. That way, you can guarantee that the next generation is going to get exactly X amount of dollars. So that's one way to do it. If you are not someone who is a big fan of life insurance, you can continue saving for retirement and building up your own assets and then leaving what's left over, assuming there's anything left over that way. So there are different ways, but it depends on, do you want to guarantee a specific amount? Life insurance is going to be the answer there. Or do you want to say, hey, y'all just get whatever property I have left over, in which case life insurance is not required.
Well, in your book, which I will say again, Starting Point, How to Create Wealth That Lasts, are you talking about stuff like this? I mean, do you say, my question, Kevin, is do you say what kind of life insurance? Because obviously term life insurance gets really expensive as you get older. Mm-hmm. And cash value life insurance is really expensive all the time.
Yep.
So do you tell people what they should do in your book about that?
We touch on the importance of just having life insurance as a whole, but in most cases, what I found in my research, what we talk about in the book as well, is term insurance tends to be the best option. As you get older, if you follow the other steps in the book, if you save for retirement, then you usually have enough in assets to pass down at that point.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And that makes sense in general, right? You don't need life insurance because the purpose of life insurance is to take care of your children or take care of whoever depends on you for income if you should die prematurely. And hopefully once you reach my age, you've got enough set aside so that that's no longer a concern and you can drop term as it gets too expensive. You agree with that? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think we're about halfway through the show. We'll go ahead here and take a break. But when we come back, I want to talk to you about specific things we could do. More bricks to put in that foundation. But we're going to be right back right after this, folks. Okay, we are back. Before we start, though, if you appreciate what we do something for us. Share the show with your friends on your favorite social platforms, and subscribe to the podcast. Takes you 2 seconds, really helps us, and we'd really appreciate it if you do that. Okay, Kevin, you're back on the spotlight here. We designed what we were going to do. We thought of a couple ways of funding it. What next? What else do we need to do?
Yeah, once we've set out that plan, once we've adjusted our budget and our spending plan, the next thing is to actually execute, which means that there's a lot of people who set up a plan and say, hey, this is what I want to do, and don't actually do it. So you actually want to execute. And then it comes that fourth thing, and this is perhaps the most important. You want to make sure that you are explicitly, either whether it's kids or it's written down via a will or something of that nature, you want to make sure that the habits and behaviors are set forth, right? So that means that if you know that you want to pass down assets to a university, make sure that they're listed as a beneficiary, right? Make sure that that's listed in your will. If you want to make sure that your kids, want to take your $30,000 or whatever it is, then you want to make sure that you sit down and have those conversations in advance. I had a conversation with my father about a month ago about what he wanted to do, what he had, and where he wanted it to go. And we made sure that it was recorded, that was written down, and that we were going to carry out that legacy and ensure that we knew what was there, knows what he wants to do, and then for us to go ahead and carry that out. So you definitely want to make sure that you have those plans stated, that you have those things written down, and that you have an updated beneficiary plan for any accounts or any properties that you do have.
You're a young man, aren't you, Kevin? How old are you?
Yeah, it depends on how my knees feel, but I am 33.
Yeah, 33, that's really, I'm impressed. I mean, I understand you're writing books to make money also, but I'm impressed that this would be a subject that you would wrap your mind around so early in life.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I think a lot of it is just a part of my background. So I'm born and raised in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which was the home of Black Wall Street, and that was one of the most famous places for Black American wealth. And we talk a lot about generational wealth just coming from that background. And a question for me growing up was like, how do you build this thing, right? Or how do you rebuild this thing? And I've always been curious about that. I think that portion of my background has informed a lot of my professional journey.
No, that's cool. I'm glad you're doing that. I'm glad other people can learn from you, from what you're doing. Okay, now here's something that let me tell you something I said to my wife. My wife is 23 years younger than me. Okay, so I said to her, if you're not interested in the stock market, which is where a lot of my money is, I'm just going to leave it all to the Humane Society. Because if you're not going to take an interest in what I'm doing. And I feel free to say this because my wife doesn't listen to these podcasts. But so
Nice.
if you're not going to pay attention, if I'm going to leave you $1 million and you're going to blow it, or worse yet, blow it on a new boyfriend, then why should I leave it to you? What about this? Where I'm going here, Kevin, is do we need to teach the recipients of our largesse? Do we need to teach them to respect that wealth that we're leaving them?
I would say yes. I think they don't have to be experts in that particular field, but I do think they should have a working knowledge. And that is for two reasons. Number one, I usually prefer that whether it's on the client side or especially in my own case, that they understand like, hey, this is what I'm receiving, which is why I had those conversations with my father and why I'll have them with my kids at some point, because they'll have control over it and say, hey, look, this is what we need to do. Or, the person trying to sell me something doesn't have my best interest in mind, because there are professions that kind of sit around and wait for these transfers to happen, kind of step in, right, and things not go well. The other part too, as I mentioned earlier, is that knowledge piece is a big part of it, right? I want to make sure that not only those assets last long enough, but that my wife and my kids and everyone says, hey, look, I know what this is. I mean, I've been an expert in it, but I do know what my next step is, right? And I think that's extremely important. Well, we noticed that, I think might have been Morgan Stanley came out with a study that says that it's like 70 or 80% of generational wealth is lost in that very next generation. And a part of that is by not understanding what those assets were, not understanding what the plan was supposed to be, and not knowing what to do next.
It's interesting. How about this? You ever meet somebody who inherited and they were just a useless person because they don't do anything with their life?
It's happened.
This would be a concern of mine. Not, I'm not in that category where I'm going to leave $300 million to somebody, but what about that? I mean, would you be concerned that one of your heirs might squander the money you so carefully set aside for them?
Yeah, so that's why I said I'd haunt my kids as a ghost. that's my first plan. But no, that is a slight concern. I say slight because my kids are very young and they don't know what a credit card is, right? However, for me, right, my prevention tactic is to make sure that they understand how to use money at a young age, and I can mold that decision, going through. It's also, in my case, why I made sure that I can kind of do what my generational wealth goals are on the front end, meaning like, hey, college is done. Hey, you have your first house. Once you kind of got that, you're kind of on your own, from there. So it depends on what angle you're looking at, and then what can you do ahead of time to prevent that. The last option too is if you sit down with an estate attorney, you can draw up a trust that has very specific instructions on how the money can be spent. And that is one way that we say in the financial biz, how to control the purse strings from the grave. So that's another way, but it's a little more costly, and you're going to need a lot more expertise to pull that one off.
Is there a limit to how much you should tell them so that, they're not poisoning your coffee?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I think it depends on who that person is and what their behaviors are. Again, I'm as a parent, I can only say but so much. They're going to change so much between now and the next 30 or 40 years. But I think it really depends on who you're leaving it for, what their personalities are, and what their tendencies have been.
I was just going to say, when my father was getting older, after my mother died, he said, I'm going to set up a trust. He has one granddaughter. There's me and my sister, and then her child.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'm going to set up a trust, because she wasn't that responsible at the time, and not that old either, for that matter, but old enough to spend money. She was like 18, 19, whatever. And he said, I'm going to set up a trust and make you and your sister trustees. And I'm like, oh God, please don't do that. Because what happens is she's going to come to us and ask us for money, and we're controlling the purse strings. And that's not good. And of course he totally ignored me and did it anyway. And it wasn't a huge amount of money, but what we did was bought her a house. Or she wanted to buy a house, and we said, sure, that's a great solution, because what she was doing was pissing it away a little bit at a time every month, and so buying her house was a great idea. We bought it at the right time, or she'd bought it, I should say, at the right time. And so that worked out. But this is something I would be really concerned about too, is having a trust where another relative is in charge of that trust. And then now you've created a huge source of friction, potentially, at least depending on who that trustee is and who the beneficiary is.
Yeah, and that's it can get complicated. There are other ways. Again, an estate attorney is knows all the details about the specificities behind it. But there are some ways where you can say, depending on how much you have, right, only 5% can be spent each year, right? And you can kind of set up that way if you want to have a little less conflict, if you will.
Yeah.
But again, I think this is why that conversation piece is extremely important on the front end, that everyone knows what the expectations are. You can work through what type of issues could come up. Like, for example, in our situation, my dad loves real estate. He owns a property in which I have a relative that stays in. I said, hey, what's going to happen to, I'm making up a name here. What's going to happen to cousin John if you pass and he's just in the house? What do we do about that? Right? Like, he's not paying rent, which that was their agreement. But like, what am I supposed to sell it? Do I let him stay there? Did he keep it forever? Like, that was a conversation that we had now, right? So that's one of those things where you can kind of sit down and say, here's what I'm thinking about. Maybe they'll agree, maybe they'll disagree. But like, what are all the scenarios that we should go through so that we know what to do and we're not confused and we can reduce the process of having any friction that you can foresee?
I have to ask, what did your dad say? Did he say, not my problem? You deal with cousin John?
I think his words were like, hey, you give him 2 years and then y'all decide what to do after that.
No, that makes good sense.
So yeah, and everyone's still here. So hopefully it's not a decision we have to like think about in the next several decades. But it was good to have that conversation up front so that in the event that occurs, no one's fighting, no one's arguing. We know exactly what he wanted and we can just carry out that plan.
Miranda, I'm not hearing anything from you, which is a shock. I just want to make sure you're still alive over there.
No. I mean, you're doing a great job over here, so it's all good. No, I mean, I think the closest thing I've got is making sure, I joke, I'm probably going to spend most of it before my son can get it. But part of what, we're doing as this legacy is, I've helped him set up an investment account. So he's already investing some of his own money. I've made him beneficiary on like my HSA, all of my retirement accounts, all of that stuff, so that when I do pass, whatever is left goes smoothly to him. So I think part of that is just making sure that like I've got all of my ducks in a row and he knows how to access everything that he needs to access should I pass unexpectedly. So I think for me, a lot of that's, twofold, where like I'm teaching him and I'm guiding him now to be investing. I had set up a Roth IRA for him back when he was like 10 or something, and he was helping me out with online business stuff, and I made contributions to that. So, kind of starting that early and then showing him, hey, this is what's available to you later on. And then also, I did a 529 and I'm helping pay for his school through the 529. And so all of those kinds of pieces together, making sure that he gets to practice now, that he's putting these principles into place, will help him in turn build his own wealth as well as whatever I manage to leave behind.
Let me ask you a question, Miranda. Your son is 21 now or 20?
He's 20. He'll be 21 in the fall.
Cool. Okay, now let's say that you're telling your son what you have, right? Basically, what if you had a lot? What if your son stopped showing ambition because he knew that the moment, and you're an envelope pusher, you could die anytime. I mean, you're a risk taker.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes. So what would you do if he started showing less ambition because he knew that if something should happen to you, he's got nothing to worry about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a rough thing. But I think I'd probably let him know, hey, like, these are not the principles I've taught you. and he knows, like, I think part of that is he knows that, like, if I pass unexpectedly, he's not going to be taken care of.
Yeah, well,
he knows I'm planning, because I said, hey, like, I plan on living my life, and, I'm not making it a huge priority to amass huge amounts of wealth for you. And, there's the life insurance policy, but, that's not going to be enough for him to live on forever. So, but I think if he ever stopped kind of doing that, I'd be like, well, what are you going to do in the meantime, buddy? Because I'm helping him out right now with stuff while he's in school, but that's dependent on like, hey, as long as you're in school, as long as you're moving forward, I'm helping you pay your rent. I'm paying your tuition. So we're helping you move forward. If you're not interested in moving forward, what does that mean? And so far, it's worked out pretty well. I honestly don't know what I'd do if he was just like, I expect you to take care of me forever, Mom. Like, I can't even imagine that situation.
No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't say, okay, legacy coach, Kevin.
Help us out, man.
Yeah, you're 30. You're 33 years old. You're obviously somebody who's going to generate significant wealth, I would assume, because you're writing books at this age and being successful in any number of other ways. And your kids are what? Toddlers?
2 and 5.
Okay, so by the time, you could be fairly wealthy, or super wealthy by the time your kids are adults. So how would you answer that question? What if they were just kind of like, well, I'm just kind of just play some video games here, not really do much. How would you combat that?
Yeah, the way I would combat it, I would say really 2 ways. Is one, I can change this plan at any point. Like, I can decide that, I can give it to someone else. I can spend it all or what have you, if I want to go that route. I think the main thing, what I would do is say, look, I intend for this to last beyond you, right? I want it to go to your kids and last as long as possible, and try and course correct those behaviors as much as I can right there in the moment. What I've learned is sometimes I learn from hands-on experience, and I could say, look, or what I would probably do is say, look, here's, $1,000, here's $10,000. I want to see you save. I want to see you start to invest. And if you can't do this, then I can have you steward, 10 times more, 30 times more, whatever that number is going to be. And then we're going to have some difficult conversations. So that's probably how I would approach it. I think the main thing is giving people an opportunity and seeing how they handle that, and then using that information, using that data to make the next informed decision.
Awesome. I feel like I've taken you all over the place except where you wanted to go in this podcast. We're almost out of time. Is there anything else that you've been trying to say, but I've been talking too much to let you say it?
Well, I will say Miranda gave me an idea. When we talk about generational wealth, it is something that is extremely fluid and you can do so many things. One thing I've seen in my experience that most people don't think about is, I know it can be tough because I'm a parent as well, but letting your kids stay home, whether they go to college, or giving them 2 or 3 years after high school to save. That's another way where you're not necessarily directly giving money, but allowing them to save for that first home can set them far and away apart from those who went straight out, took on student loan debt, and then went to that first apartment, and they have less cash to save and take that next step. I've seen people who took that 3 years and bought their first home, and now they're, on their way towards their first million because they're saving and investing without that burden, versus those who started from college and then went straight into the workforce and didn't have the opportunity to save. So it doesn't always have to cost money. Sometimes it's just giving them space, right, to save and invest and do things that most people wouldn't be able to do. And another way to do that too is, once your kid turns 16, they have their first job, starting an IRA at 16 is very different than starting your first one at 25. And that can be the difference between generational wealth for that next person in line versus me having to give them the cash up front. So those are some alternate ways as well.
That's really well said. I like that a lot. What my parents said to me, they said, we'll pay for your college providing you go at least 1,500 miles away from here. Get the hell out of town. But anyway, anything else to add, Miranda, Kevin, Aaron?
I was just going to say, if you don't really have a lot of funds, one of the most frugal ways that you can leave a legacy is just buy a Sharpie and write "I was here" on bathroom stalls, or write it on a dollar bill and thumbtack it to your favorite bar. This is where you can start.
And this is why you don't have a big speaking part in this podcast. Not that anyone can get a word in edgewise with me on the mic. But we're out of time, right? Yep, we are. We are out of time, folks. We are never out of topic, though. Dig a little deeper. You're going to find links to lots more info in our show notes. And remember, if your goal is to make more, to spend less, to retire, or in this case, die rich, your online home is moneytalksnews.com. And don't forget to check out Miranda's online home as well. That is Miranda Marquit, MARQUIT.com. And of course, you want to visit Kevin at his website. That is buildingbread.com. And you want to get his book too, which say, what's your name? Your book again? Kevin, give us one more plug.
Starting Point, How to Create Wealth That Lasts.
I said this at the break, but I'll say it again. If you like what we're doing, subscribe to our podcast. We would really appreciate it. Kevin, thanks for being here again. We're going to see you again soon, I hope. I am Stacy Johnson.
I'm Miranda Marquardt.
I'm Aaron Freeman.
Aaron's writing on the wall right now, I think. Thanks for hanging out with us, guys. We're going to see you right here the next time.